About 1,600 years ago, a young North African man named Augustine, who would become a great bishop and Christian theologian, struggled to mourn when he was by his mother's side as she expired her last breath. Augustine closed her eyes, and as he described it in his book Confessions, a great wave of sorrow surged into his heart. Tears started to come, but he stemmed the flow, and the tears dried up. He thought it was more mature to put his sobs in check and not mark his mother's death in that way. It wasn't actually until the morning after they'd laid her to rest that he says he wept for her and for himself, writing this: "The tears which I have been holding back streamed now, and I let them flow as freely as they would, making of them a pillow for my heart. And on them it rested." That's a real cry. It's not a tearing up out of pride at a child's play or game, or welling up at a particularly sentimental commercial, as I am wont to do, or feeling misty while cutting an onion. Augustine describes the kind of all-out weeping that leaves us exhausted until we can do no other thing but rest. His heart rested on a pillow of tears, he says. And this from the same man who in the same book said these famous words: "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." Perhaps the theologian intended the link. These many years later, and there still is so much to grieve in our world, and I wonder how many of us have taken Augustine's initial approach. I know I have. When the great wave of sorrow has surged, we too have stemmed the flow, held the sobs in check, let the lump linger. Sometimes, out of an awareness of the immensity of the world's sorrow relative to our own, we wonder, who are we to let our tears flow, when in the scheme of things they would be but drops in the ocean? What good are tears in a productive, efficient society, a mission-driven church? They rarely make the agenda. They're considered a distraction. I was talking to one of my very closest friends recently whose child is sick, who got to the heart of the dilemma. She said she'd been encouraged to let herself cry, but said, "I'm just afraid that if I do, I may never stop." But what if Augustine had it right? What if our tears are the very thing that deliver us into the very presence of God? What if we have to let go a little? What if we have to be vulnerable a bit? What if, in holding back, we diminish our own life with the God who took on human flesh to share our every human experience and not just the good ones? What if, in our insistence on being strong, unmoved, we risk the real invitation to real, soul-deep rest? We may be loath to do so, thinking that our faith only has room for the up emotions, thinking that once we do that, we fear we may never be able to stop, that perhaps we ourselves will be swept away. I mean, nobody likes a Debbie Downer. But a Christian faith that only makes room for cheer is myopic and misleading at best, dismissive and destructive at worst. Well, there is joy in this faith, deep joy to be sure, but in those seasons of life when joy is harder to come by, when it is muted by mourning, we need a reminder that our hope does not depend on how we feel. Our hope does not depend on how we feel. Author Kate Bowler tells us of the experience of being in a hospital waiting room and of watching as a daughter urged her mother to put on lipstick before the doctor came into the room. And Bowler was immediately worn out, she says, by the tyranny of prescriptive joy. Yes, holding it all together is a different kind of exhaustion than the kind that follows a good cry. Revelation chapter 7 offers us a different way, a different picture of the God in whom our hearts long to find their rest. It is a grand scene. It is a scene captured by Renaissance artists with sweeping cloudscapes. It is a scene ensconced in beautiful stained glass windows designed to capture the brilliance of the sun as it shines through them like an open portal. Angels are everywhere, like a halo around the Lamb who is rightfully on the throne, and they are singing. And I, at least, hear Easter brass in accompaniment. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. And there's a feeling of eternity in a flow like that. Like the praise will never end. And it's triumphant, isn't it? But look a little closer. This scene may be triumphant, but it avoids an unhealthy triumphalism. And there's a difference. This scene is triumphant. It flows with celebration and joy and assurance and affirmation that what we long for now will one day be made complete. But it is not triumphalistic. In the victory, there is no smugness. No, I told you so, religious superiority, no beating of the chest. There is heartfelt praise, not haughty boasting. There is strength and sovereignty. And there is also tenderness and compassion. Because look again, praise is not the only thing that flows here. So do the tears of those who have come out of the great ordeal, those who have known striving, those who have known losing, those who have thirsted not only for righteousness, but for a cup of clean water. The praise flows intermingled with tears from those who have been burned by the harsh realities of human living that are as inescapable as the sun. The praise, it flows from those who have wept, are weeping, whose tears have been their food and day and night, as the psalmist put it. Those who have grieved, who are grieving, are among the choir raising the strain. And so we might say it this way. A triumphalistic faith declares God reigns. But the Christian faith is a triumphant faith, and it declares God reigns and love wins. Because here's what God does even here. God shares God's moment of grand adulation with the brokenhearted. God, to whom every knee is bowed, kneels down, and beholding beloved ones with deep compassion, wipes every tear from their eyes, making a pillow out of them for weary hearts. And the message is not stop crying. The message is that the weeping are welcome, that a few tears will not make God tarry in coming to our aid. The opposite, in fact, is true. God is beckoned closer by those tears. The message is that though weeping may last for a night, joy comes in the morning because God reigns and love wins. And in this promise, our hearts can rest. In 2013, a photographer named Rose Lynn Fisher found herself wondering what a human tear looks like up close. She was going through a time in her life that held a lot of change and loss, and so she says she had a lot of raw material to work with. She caught one of her own tears on one of those clear slides, and then she dried it and then peered at it through a standard light microscope. What she says she saw was like an aerial view, almost as if she was looking down at a landscape from a plane. And so then she started wondering about the topography of our tears, whether a tear of grief would look any different than a tear of joy, and how they would compare to those famous onion tears. This is amazing. What she learned from photographing over 100 different tears from 100 different people, including a newborn, was that human beings have 3 kinds of tears. The first is the kind that keeps the cornea moisturized. The second is the kind of tear that responds to an environmental irritant, that onion, say, or a bit of dust. But the third kind, psychic tears, are the tears that fall because of deep emotion or stress. And all of these, she says, have different microscopic structures depending on their function. In her book, The Topography of Tears, you can see the beautiful and wildly different ways these tears are shaped. And amazingly, those psychic tears have a protein in them that acts as a natural painkiller that is released when the body is under stress. So you might say that those tears are both a response to pain and its antidote. Biologically, they supply what is needed, while theologically, they beckon the help that is needed, the presence that offers rest. Fisher writes this about her work. Tears are the medium of our most primal language in moments as unrelenting as death, as basic as hunger, and as complex as a rite of passage. They are the evidence of the inner life overflowing its boundaries, spilling over into consciousness. Wordless and spontaneous tears release into us the possibility of realignment, reunion, catharsis, intractable resistance short-circuited. It's as though each one of our tears carries a microcosm of the collective human experience, like one drop of an ocean. Revelation 7 gives us a picture of our intractable resistance short-circuited. It is good news for those of us who prefer to stem the flow, or who have come to believe that they must. Here we encounter a God who is summoned to our side by our tears, who can make from them an opportunity for divine comfort. The Lamb on the throne, whose praises flow unendingly, welcomes those whose tears flow freely. And so we know it to be true. God reigns, and love wins. Today we rest in that promise as we let our griefs flow to God as an offering intermingled with our praise. And here is who is in the choir today among those for whom offering praise is uncomplicated. Included in that choir are the voices of everyone for whom death feels unrelenting, and everyone who hungers for good news, and everyone who faces a rite of passage, a change that is either joyful or difficult, or maybe a little bit of both. Included in the choir are those who need the permission to let their inner lives overflow their boundaries just for a minute, those who can't find the words to speak, those who wish to carry the collective human experience into the presence of God, that it might be transformed. Brothers and sisters, your tears are as holy an offering as your praise is. So let them flow just as freely. Taking triumphant rest in this good news, God reigns and love wins. To God be the glory, now and forever. Amen.